throughout his ministry, Jesus would say something and it would be so awe-inspiring or so confusing or so profound that his disciples would often gather amongst themselves and talk about what Jesus just said. And many times they came to the conclusion, this is a hard saying. Like, what Jesus said is really hard to accept, or what Jesus just said is really hard to understand. And that happened multiple times while Jesus was doing his ministry. The disciples would hear him teach and they would conclude, this is really hard. And the truth is, Jesus said some things that are very hard, and they're very countercultural, and they're very convicting, and they're very condemning. And some of the things that Jesus said can leave us confused. And so this week I want us to look at some of them, and I want to share one with you that I just find to be, well, very hard. Jesus several times would encounter people, and he would talk to them and relate to them, and they would, in the best way they knew how, turn to him, and they would believe that he was the Son of God. And at the end of the conversation, Jesus would say, now go and sin no more. Or, now go and leave your life of sin. And Jesus would say this to somebody one time who was literally caught in the act of adultery. He would say this to somebody who had, at this point in her life, had had 5 husbands and was shacking up with a 6th guy. He would say these things. He would say, go and sin no more, to people who are actively sinning, to people who seem to be ruled, their lives, their behavior, everything about their lives seemed to be ruled by sin. Jesus would have one conversation with them, and then he would send them on their way and say, go and stop sinning. Now, you and I both know that if we decide today, okay, from today until the rest of my life, I'm going to stop sinning. I'm going to go and sin no more. I'm going to go and leave a life of sin. Now, we might be able to, with just sheer force of will, we might be able to make it a day or two and not do anything wrong, not hurt anybody, not offend anybody, not commit a sin that anybody is aware of. But Jesus also raised the bar, and he said, just thinking something in your brain that is sinful, choosing to think about that is a sin. And so he raised the bar so high that the truth is none of us could reach it. He tells these people, go and sin no more. And then he says, even if you think a sinful thought, you've sinned. So how can we do that? How can we leave a life of sin? How can we encounter Jesus and then go and sin no more? And a lot of people over the years have translated this or thought of these sayings of Jesus as, well, I have to be perfect. I have to strive for perfection. And that can get us into some trouble as well. So Paul comes along later, and in Romans, he's writing a book to the church in Rome, and Paul takes what Jesus said and he gives us some practical ways to live it. And in Romans chapter 6, Paul says, now count yourselves or consider yourselves or think of yourselves as dead to sin, but alive in Christ. In other words, he is saying, and now that you've encountered Jesus, consider that old part of your life, that sinful life that was ruled and reigned by sin, dead. And now you are ruled and reigned by Christ. It does not mean that you're always going to do things right. It doesn't mean you're going to be perfect. In fact, Paul would later say, why do I do the things I don't want to do? And the things that I do want to do, I don't do. In other words, Paul was saying, I know what's right and I keep doing what's wrong. And I know what's wrong and I want to do what's right. Even Paul struggled with this whole leaving the life of sin. And yet he tells these people, consider your life today and consider yourself to be dead to sin. That you no longer live in the kingdom of sin. You are no longer ruled or reigned by sin. You are alive today in Christ. So he's not asking for a sinless, perfect life, because that is not possible. But he is asking us, he is telling us, you are no longer a slave to sin. You are no longer, sin is no longer your master. Jesus is. So today, as you go about your life, trying to do your best, trying to live up to all the standards that God has set for you, when you think about the truth that Jesus said, go and sin no more, may we be people who are dead to sin. It no longer has a hold on us, but we are alive in Christ. We are no longer slaves to sin. We have a new master, and he is good, and he is kind, and he is merciful, and he is forgiving. We are alive in Christ, so go live. See you later.